After 30 years since the last Mario movie came out, there's been an unreal amount of hype for a new movie. And so Nintendo partnered up with Illumination to finally make the Mario movie the franchise deserved. There was high expectations for this movie, and I think it delivered. Before the weekend even ended, it broke the record for the biggest box office opening of all time for an animated movie. It seems like everyone loved it, except the critics. There was a big difference between what the critics thought of the movie and what the audience thought of it. But I think we should look into why that's the case. Let's start by talking about the movie itself, and you should watch till the end because I'll explain why Rotten Tomato scores are pretty misleading. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest Mario fan, but I grew up playing a lot of the games. I think Mario Kart on the Nintendo DS was actually my first ever video game, so I guess since I was little, it's always been a part of my life. If you've ever played Mario Odyssey on the Switch, there's a level in there that's kind of like a tribute to the entire history or success of Mario, and it was so heartwarming and nostalgic to go through that level. Every detail reminded me of a specific moment in my childhood, and I've been chasing that feeling ever since. And the Mario movie finally did that for me. I got that feeling throughout the entire movie. I've watched it twice now and I absolutely love it. It's not a perfect movie, but it's so fun, it is really worth the watch. I don't know what it's like to watch this movie as someone that has never played or even heard anything about Mario before, but I'd say this is still an enjoyable movie. It doesn't overstay its welcome, it's pretty short, and there's never a boring moment. Of course, all the references and little Easter eggs are a big part of the experience, but I think even without them, the movie can stand on its own. I know a lot of critic reviews would probably disagree with me on that, but I really feel like this movie is not only for people that grew up with Mario, but kind of for everyone. Even though most Mario fans are probably adults by now, this movie is clearly made for kids, and I think that's a big indicator that this movie isn't just for Mario fans. I'm sure that there are plenty of kids that barely understood any of the references but had an absolute blast watching this movie. A big part of what makes this movie so fun for me is the cast. I remember back in 2021 when Nintendo revealed the cast for this movie, I legit could not believe my eyes, man. So cool. Anytime I would think about Chris Pratt as Mario and Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong, it would always make me chuckle. When the first trailer dropped and we finally got to hear Chris Pratt as Mario, there was a lot of disappointment and controversy, but in the movie, it's a completely different story. The voice acting is pretty much perfect. There's even a part where he talks with the iconic accent from the games, and he does it flawlessly. I don't know what happened in those trailers. It's like they picked the worst takes they had and kept all the good ones from us for the actual movie. Anyway, the trailer doesn't really matter now that the movie is out, but it's just a weird situation. One thing I've noticed is that they really animated and wrote these characters around the actors. Like, I really don't know how to explain it, but Bowser looks like Jack Black, especially when he's smiling. It's almost uncanny, but yeah, it's kind of the case for most of these characters. We even got Donkey Kong doing the Seth Rogen laugh. When I heard that there were going to be pop songs in the movie, I thought it was going to be so corny, like the usual Illuminations movie, but it's really not the case here. It just makes the movie way more fun. The animation is also beautiful, every shot is filled with details, and the lighting is always amazing. It's not even comparable to any of the other Illuminations movie out there. You can tell Nintendo was breathing down Illumination's neck during the production of this movie. It looks so good. Nintendo has such a particular way of presenting their characters. I remember back in the first Wreck-It Ralph movie, in the villain group therapy scene, there was a story about how Nintendo asked the studio to change the Bowser scene only because he wasn't holding his cup how Nintendo wanted him to. Anyway, I think overall, I would give the movie an 8 out of 10. I think it's worth talking about how there seems to always be disparity when it comes to critic score and audience score. Mario is a great example. Uncut Gems had the critics loving it, but it wasn't really connecting with a lot of people. A lot of people loved the Joker movie, but it didn't really impress the critics. Of course, there were a few exceptions when it comes to movies that are clearly dog shit or movies that everyone agrees that they're classics. But I want to talk about why this kind of scoring happens so often. I think it has to be the fact that critics watch movies for very different reasons than us. It is literally their job to go watch movies, and I'm not saying that they don't enjoy it or that they go watch them reluctantly, because I know a lot of them truly love movies and care about them. There are always exceptions, but I'm trying to say that they're kind of desensitized to the magic of movies. Now, what I mean by that is that movies are this rare activity where we get to leave all our problems behind and just lose ourselves in a story for a few hours. But for critics, the only thing left for them to do is compare every movie to the gold standard and rate it on a scale. every review becomes this comparison game of looking at every single technical aspect of a movie. So for them, figuring out if a movie is good or not, it almost becomes a math equation. I'm gonna be honest, I fell into this trap a lot too. When I started watching a lot of cult classics and masterpieces, I watched them with such a critical eye that I never could get really immersed in a movie. I always saw these actors as only actors and not as their actual characters. I caught myself saying stuff like, wow, this is such an incredible acting performance, instead of just being in the moment. I think the experience of just going to a movie and not necessarily turning your brain off, but going into it without having to look at everything with a critical eye really is a blessing. With how popular Rotten Tomatoes is, I was actually surprised when I found out how the scoring system worked. Because unlike IMDb and other sites, the percentage that you see isn't the average score of all the reviews. It isn't a score at all, actually. It is the percentage of reviews that gave the movie a fresh score. Fresh in Rotten Tomatoes is just their way of saying the movie has a passing score or a good enough score. This brings me to why it can be misleading when you don't know about this system. When you see a movie with a 90% or higher, it doesn't mean that the movie is a 90 out of 100 or a 9 out of 10. It only means that 90% of the reviews liked it. Which is really vague because liking a movie could mean that you gave it a 6 out of 10 and you thought it wasn't great but still worth a watch. Or it could also mean that you give it a 10 out of 10 and you thought it was the greatest movie of all time. The problem there is that in both those scenarios, the percentage does not change on Rotten Tomatoes. So how do you tell when a movie is a masterpiece or just a movie that is good enough? Well, let me give you some alternatives to Rotten Tomatoes because as we just saw, it's not really the most reliable or accurate site to know exactly how good a movie is. I'd say Rotten Tomatoes is better for figuring out if a movie is worth a watch or not, and not really to see how people rated it. Metacritic and IMDb are good alternatives that average the score of all reviews, but keep in mind that these popular sites are always susceptible to review bombing or botting. That's when a group of people collectively put negative reviews or use bot accounts to influence the average score. For sites like IGN and other article-based sites, be careful because there's always different journalists for each review, so there's a lot of inconsistencies between the ratings. Two different movies that you would like could have very different scores because they have been reviewed by two very different people. There's also a social media app for movies if you're into that. It's called Letterboxd, and if you follow people that generally have the same taste as you, then it's a good way to tell if you'd like a movie or not. Another big alternative is YouTubers. If you have the same taste as a YouTuber, you can often trust them on whether a movie is worth watching or not. Shameless plug, but that's kind of what I do here. And the final alternative is word of mouth. I'd say one of the biggest factors for me if I watch a movie or not is if someone has told me about it in real life. Because sometimes I stumble upon a movie on social media that I'm pretty interested in and then I forget about it because no one around me talks about it or plans to see it. Sometimes the best way to go about it is to just not read any reviews and just go into a movie with zero expectation and form your own opinion. Anyway, in terms of good video game adaptations, we've been absolutely blessed recently, and if you haven't watched HBO's new adaptation, you should watch this video on why you have to watch HBO's The Last of Us. Anyway, see you.